Everybody. I hope you can, I can see our guests. So welcome to this fourth day of the Dev Days, one of the last sessions. And I'm glad to have with me Sasha Volkov and Maidul, who will be talking on the curious case of Encounter++. And I'm quite interested, also curious to know about this. More about this, and without further ado, I'll pass on to our speakers.
Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. I just want to make sure I do everything correctly.
Take it easy.
And the presentation mode. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Can you hear me, Sasha?
Yeah,
yep. I can hear you, Maidul. Thanks everyone for joining our session today. I hope you had a good time and learned a lot during this conference last 4 days. And thanks for joining our Thinking in FHIR session. My name is Sasha Volkov and I'm solution architect at Optum. I'm a chief architect for the Optum Data Exchange product, which is the clinical data acquisition platform. And today with me is Maidul.
Hey, this is Maidul Islam. I'm also a solution and application architect at Optum, working for Optum Data Exchange and the National Clinical Clearinghouse Platform Group.
In this session, Maidul and I will use a hypothetical existing product that illustrates business case analysis and a solution design from the perspective of an architect. We will discuss how existing system that supports limited FHIR transactions can accommodate additional FHIR-related requirements. Our presentation will be in the form of a dialogue of two architects and a product owner in the background. Basically, we'll go through like a solutioning process. And our goal is to illustrate how you can apply what you have learned during this conference or any other training or educational sessions that you took in the past about the FHIR. Just to set a background context, think about yourself as the June 14, you're back at work on Monday at work after the Dev Days conference. In case of Sasha and Maidul, they both are architects on existing product that currently supports clinical data acquisition from various sources in various formats. So can be V2 messages, V3 documents, can be some CSV limited clinical data. It can take it through MMLP or IHE profiles. So the data is stored in a database as a discrete records. It's not a FHIR native system. It does have a subscription service, pretty mature. It allows user to subscribe to an event of interest and to receive notification about this event. It also supports a limited FHIR functionality. They use HappyFHIR for a FHIR facade that allows clients to issue simple queries to retrieve some FHIR data. Hi, Maidul, how are you?
I'm fine, Sasha.
Hope you like the FHIR Dev Days.
Oh, it was really great. Learning a lot of things from the great speakers.
Yeah, and our product owners, they want to take advantage of that. And they already talked to us this morning about the new requirements that came from our customer. And there are two sections, two parts of it, notification and retrieval. So our customers want to enhance our current subscription model to identify trigger events that are V2 messages, and we already support it. But what they're looking for is actually the notification to include not just trigger event, but additional data that is related to encounter. And one more requirement is that this notification should be in FHIR. We don't support it, so we'll need to design for that. And the reason they want to include additional encounter-related data is because in their system, they want to make a decision whether they want to retrieve more information from our system so that they can use it in their downstream workflow. This retrieval should be, again, done in FHIR and should be completed in as few interactions as possible. So that will be very interesting requirement for us. What do you think? What are their first thoughts? How we can support in our existing system, Maidul?
That's true. I also had this follow-up conversation with the POs, and I was trying to find out whether if there is any specific requirement from the client side that how we are going to send the information if there is anything they have already requested. And I found out that they haven't put anything as such requirement. They wanted to understand from our side how we can give them the information what they have required. So while thinking about it, I looked at our existing infrastructure as well as the architecture. We do have a notifications. If I understood correctly, their requirements, two requirements. One is called, and they wanted to receive the notification based on any encounter event. And then they wanted to have a follow-up call to our systems to retrieve all the encounter-related information in a FHIR format. So if we do have that existing facade pattern on top of our relational database, we do have a subscription notifications already established. We just need to add enhance to have that with a FHIR notification, and also to add more to our existing APIs to have that capability. So I do not envision to reinvent the wheel, rather than see if we can have that information fit into our existing model. The reason being is that we have other interfaces with the clients to support both sides of the world, FHIR as well as all the V2 or IHC, those interfaces.
Right, and one thing that they keep talking about is encounter, and by encounter they don't mean the FHIR resource. They mean encounter as a clinical concept. Just to refresh my memory, I went online and Googled it, and I found this definition in the medical dictionary, FHIR dictionary. So basically, encounter is the contact, can be virtual contact or physical contact between patient and healthcare practitioner, like a provider. And during this contact, some clinical activity might happen. For example, it can be annual checkup, it can be lab order. And of course, as a result of this encounter, there will be multiple clinical documents generated. So I think what we need to focus on is admissions as ADT A01, labs as RAUs, and clinical notes as MDM. And we're pretty comfortable with working with these messages. But our customer is looking to receive this information in a FHIR format. So what do you think, what FHIR resources can we use to represent these messages?
So I was looking at the FHIR specification, and then I found that implementation guide for V2 to FHIR. And I could find out that ADT and ORU has been done some kind of mapping, which we could leverage the requirement to meet the client. However, I didn't find anything related for the MDM or the clinical notes or the reports, what client is also looking for. So for the ADT, when I was looking at that IG, so I could find out the mapping. And then I was also looking at the FHIR full specifications, how I can map to it. If we look at that ADT, in the FHIR world, you can map this to admission visit to a call encounter, patients, account, coverages, or benefits. So each ADT can be mapped to encounter. Encounter does is called subjects, which is to a patient, and each patient which can have 1 or 0 accounts, which can be referred for the claims. And then accounts is related for his coverages, which insurance or the coverages health, what he has, he can benefit from that.
Yeah, actually, it's nice. I think I saw the presentation on this FHIR Dev Days on V2 bridge into FHIR that using the illustrated those mapping. Let's see if I can use this to map the RAUs. So based on that mapping, the RAU will be mapped to multiple FHIR resources as well, like diagnostic report, observation, imaging study, patient, and encounter. And I think those are 5 probably of greatest interest for our customer. And looking at the ADT and the RAU, I kind of start to see the common FHIR resources like patient and encounter. I think we should be able to leverage to when we are looking for the encounter-related resources. What about clinical notes?
Yeah, I was trying to find that in the FHIR specifications as well as that existing IZ mapping for the FHIR to FHIR, but I couldn't find. However, I spent time looking into MDM. MDM is nothing but a clinical notes, right? It could have a history and physical science progress note, consultation, or a discharge summary. And I was trying to map that. I could map MDM, those reports, to a document reference. Document reference has a binary. And within the binary, you can have an attachment for the full resource, full report as a base64 encoded. And also document reference does have the call patients, and then it could be referenced to an encounter. I think if we look at everything, that MDM also could be mapped or linked to a patient and encounter, which is the critical foundation for this requirement, because the client wants to know all related encounter information for the patients for a particular event. And we probably could map those in a pictorially. And if we want to go back and see, I was looking at the specification, full resources for the encounter. If you see an encounter does have call subject, as I mentioned, so it's reference to a patient or a group. Here, in this case, it's of the interest is the patient. And then if you see patient has in the encounter itself has account, which is reference to the account actual resources. We need an account. If you see, it is again refers to a subject, which is patient in this case, and does has a coverage. And if you see in the coverage is a reference to actual coverage.
Yeah, that's a great find. But I'm very visual person. I would like to see a diagram. Let's see if we can make one.
Yeah, I was trying to map that. I know you will ask that question. So I was trying to map those. If you see, I was trying to put into in a pictorially, and then I could relate encounter has a subject 0 to 1, which is a patient. And then from encounter could have a 0 and more accounts. And from each account could have a 0 or coverage, and if you see coverage could have a one-to-one beneficiary, which is patient in this case.
Yep, that's great. I love it. Let's see if I can add again labs here. Based on our finding on the mapping, labs are mapped to diagnostic reports and observation encounter in a patient. So both diagnostic report and observation, they reference encounter, can be 0 or 1 encounter. And both of them reference patient as well. So I think that gives a pretty good idea how we can make the query for these resources efficient later on in our discussion, but we still need to map the clinical notes.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning, I was going through the FHIR specifications. I could see that within the document reference, it does have called context. Within the context, it can have a encounter 1 or more, 0 or more. So if you see, we can make that relationship from the document reference to the encounter. And then the document reference has a does have content 1 or more. And each content, it can be represented with an attachment, which is nothing but the binary payload or a URL where your actual payload or a report for that clinical notes or events are stored. So if we see is the center of the event is the encounter. From the encounter, we can traverse through all the resources, which is the interest for this requirement.
Yep, and I really like this representation that we came up with. So let's talk about the subscription notifications. As our product owner mentioned, customer is interested in 2 events: clinical notes, and can be of these 3 types, like history of physical, progress notes, and consult notes, and lab results. On top of that, they want us to include encounter and patient in every notification, regardless whether it's a clinical note or lab result. And since we have a robust subscription service, we want to make minimal changes to it. We just need to work on a notification side. No changes in the subscription itself. but on notification side. And I'm not sure how we can represent subscription notification in FHIR. I'm just wondering whether you have any ideas. Maybe you have attended any sessions in the FHIR Dev Days that help us to design for this.
Yeah, I did. Attended the presentation from Gino, and while doing that, I could relate to that. We could map to our R5 subscription notification bundle, which is the way which client is looking for. To existing subscription, we can enhance with the rule for a trigger event, and then we can add a workflow to represent for all of V2 document and which client is looking for, and we can represent those in R5. And the R5 does have call type called subscription and notifications. Within the subscription and notification, it could consist one or more entries, which first one is become the subscription status. So if we see in the R5, we can, within this is a resource type is a bundle. It could be represented the payload empty or full resources. While the requirement, knowing the requirement, we will always look for the full resources. Within the full resources, you can represent the type as event notifications. And the first entry for this, within this bundle, we can represent the subscription status, subscriptions, topics, and the status which has been mapped, what event has been triggered, and then follow up with a follows by all the entries represented as a resources, what the client is interested in. For example, observations, clinical or diagnosis report, and the encounter patients, everything can be bundled together and sent back within the notifications to the client.
Yeah, you really pay attention to these FHIR Dev Day sessions, and I think that it's very close to what Gino represented in his slides. You probably should give a ask for copyright from him and allow us to use it in our presentation. And I really like this presentation. It's agnostic of whether it's JSON or XML, but it does convey you the content that goes into and actually even the orders of the entries that should be included here. My only concern is that we are not at R5 yet. We are at R4. And when I was looking at the FHIR subscription specification for R4, it states that the server is able to send notifications without any information about the matching resource or with the entire resource. And there is not much more information about how you actually send the notification, what format, which resources you use. It's pretty silent about that. Doing a little bit more digging, I figure out that as a release of 5, when they looked at a couple of options how to represent the FHIR subscription notification. In the release number 5, preview number 2, which was, I believe, two years ago almost, the recommendation is to use the history bundle. And the subscription status kind of information can be represented as a meta extension, like you see here. And the actual trigger event can be entry 0, like observation, and other resources can be other entries. It looks fine. The only problem, I have 2 problems with this suggestion. One is that history bundle, it requires you to include the request response elements, which are mandatory, and that they don't quite fit into our use case. And second one is the meta extensions is like an exotic feature for me. I'm wondering whether our clients that are barely starting with the FHIR, they will be able to properly process this notification bundle. Do you have any ideas how we can make it more customer friendly?
Yeah, I could find one thing in the R5 itself. There is an option called R5 backport. As R4 is silent under how the notifications can be bundled together and sent, we can utilize R5 backport. Within that, it's R5 backport. It's still a bundle and history, but the representation for the entry 0 is a little different. You can do parameterized, basically name, value, pair, whatever subscription has match or topic or a status or for the events, how many has match happened, you can put everything into the parameterized. And then followed by all the entries within a bundle, you can represent as followed by observation, encounter, patients, and other things. But it fits into the R4 bundle representations, because even though it's in the style of the R5, but it's one of the things I'm not sure whether you will like it or not, but it has one other mandatory thing is same as request and response, because its representation is a history. That's why you requires to include that request and response element as part of this bundle.
Yeah, it looks a lot better to me, Maidul. So I like that we use the parameter resource rather than metadata meta extension. I'm just wondering if we can take this and simplify it a little bit for our customers, and instead of the history type bundle, use a collection. So this way we don't need to deal with a history bundle, and we still can represent the subscription status information nicely as a parameters and the rest of resources as well. My only concern is that if our customers follow the R5 backport and they already support it, then we need to support whatever they're already comfortable with. I think we have a very good start on the subscription notification. Let's talk about the data retrieval. So our customers wants to retrieve all the encounter-related data, and it can be from our diagram. It can be encounter, patient, coverage, account, observation, diagnostic report, document reference, binary, all these things. They're all encounter-related. And they want to retrieve it in as few interactions as possible, preferably a single one. So if you look at even if you look at the ORAU, there are, as we discussed, there are multiple resources that is being mapped to diagnostic report, observation, and others. So we need to really make sure that we keep our customers happy, and we should come up with something that that will help our customers to efficiently retrieve data from us. And just a reminder, this is what we will be looking at, working with. Let's make sure that we take full advantage of that. So, and talking about the options, of course, option one is just retrieve a query a single resource at a time. It's very chatty, but probably customers can do it because it's simple in a sense, but it is not very efficient. Maidul, I'm just wondering whether you have any other ideas. And one of our subject matter experts, Linda Michelson, she mentioned to me encounter compartment. Not sure what is it. So do you know anything about encounter compartment?
Yes, Sasha. So there's two things I wanted to mention in this one. People might ask that question, why do you need a data retrieval when you have represented the subscription notification? The intent is that you might come that trigger event come in the different order. So different type of or different sequence. If we send the notifications, the client wanted to retrieve that information because we have everything onto our clinical repository. Unless they wanted to store everything, what we have, then basically you are replicating that what your clinical repository, what we have, the client needs to have that. That's why they are looking for data retrieval options if they wanted to retrieve. Yes, I looked at that encounter compartment. It's called encounter everything. So if you see in the right side, when you make a query with encounter $everything, you can get all the resources, related resources for the encounter, like the communication request, diagnosis report, medication order, or the observation. However, one of the things it does have gaps of what client is looking for. Client is looking for patients and the account and coverage, which doesn't fit into the encounter. Moreover, that we'll be giving them so much information which they might not be interested in all these resources. Their interested resources are encounter, patients, coverages, clinical notes, or the document reference. So if we give this one, they will have, it might be overwhelming for them, what they will do.
Yeah, I don't like it either. So in our use case, it doesn't really meet requirements. I remember 2 years ago at Redmond, I attended an excellent FHIR Dev Days session with Graham Greaves, and he was talking about exactly the same problem, chattiness in the FHIR, and how you can address. And he actually covered two options. Both of them rely on the fact that the resources in the FHIR, they have relationships with each other, and you can represent it as a graph, directional graph. So option number one is to use the graph definition. And with this option, you can define what resources you want to get retrieved as a graph with all the relationships and search and retrieval criteria. And as a result, you will receive all the match resources in its full, with its full content, with all elements. So it's basically all or nothing. FHIR GraphQL also relies on this nature of relationship between FHIR resources as a graph, and it allows you to query on specific resources. But what it allows you also allowed to do is to indicate which elements you want to receive back. And for example, like in this case, in a slide, you see a GraphQL query for the patient or with a D123. You don't want to get the full patient resource, but just two elements, ID and active. And well, so one problem here is that you don't get a FHIR resource, you get a JSON object, right, with some data, and you need to know how to interpret it. That's really good. I kind of like this approach. My only problem is that we don't have a full FHIR server, or we just have a FHIR facade. Maybe if we had a CDR, we can do it easily, but with the FHIR facade only, it will take a lot of development effort to support this. Do you have any ideas what else we can do, Maidul?
Yes, I do. So as you're saying, that FHIR GraphQL and graph definition is very powerful in the sense that your resources needs to be stored mainly in the FHIR format, not on the legacy or relational database. And then also it requires the developers to be more knowledgeable in the sense the FHIR part or FHIR or the graph definitions, how they can represent. I was looking at the options. Is there a way of simplifying these options? So we could do a bundle post query with a batch tag. And within that batch, we can request for the related resources. If you see on the right side, you can see entries requested, get request for the document reference for the matching encounter on the clinical notes. Similarly for the encounter or the observations. We could request this one in a single post request, and we can give the client as a batch response all the related resources for each of the queries within a single bundle. If you see within the bundle, you will see entries within the bundle, because each entry is represented for a response for each entry queries. Within the entry could be a bundle, because if you have a query parameter with a match, multiple match, then you will see multiple entries within the bundle, within the entries itself. So if you see left side, you see an entry within the bundle, and then you have an entry again, all the document matching reference. And similarly for you will in the right side, if you have a matching observation, it is all the matching observation for the encounter, and then you represent it as a bundle and send all the responses back with a batch response with a single client response.
Yeah, I really like this approach. And I think based on our current capabilities in our system and based on the customer requirements and their beginning journey on the FHIR, they don't work with FHIR a lot and they are not very familiar with FHIR. I think with some guidance and some minimum education, option 4 will be the best. However, options 3 and might be also very attractive for those systems that have a full FHIR server. It will be a lot easier for them to support. And again, with some client education, you can use this option as well.
Yeah, we might need to look for, it could be many more other options are also available in the FHIR, right? So we just looked at a couple of options within that option 3 and 4 are more prominent as within the system itself. However, for our case, as you're mentioning, bundle query option 4 fits more.
All right, yeah, so what do we get, Maidul? What are we going, yeah.
If we see in the proposed solutions, what I was planning to have that within the subscriptions, we'll add all the trigger events the client is requested, and then we'll add the notifications for the FHIR to the client so that we can send back that notifications with the post-bundle batch query. And then we'll enhance our FHIR facade queries to add this post query. It will be a bundle post query, and then they can put whatever related resources for the encounter they need for after the trigger event. We can suffice them with a single response back to them.
Yep, and it will help our clients to implement this with minimal effort as well, since we don't rely on them to take into account what order the messages are coming from, and they can always get whatever they want based on what already is received in the repository.
And one of the big advantages for us is that we do not need to change anything onto the infrastructure, right? And then we'll be able to fit all types of legacy as well as the FHIR new paradigm. And with that, I have a couple of parting thoughts is that we need to be always pragmatic with our design. We need to see how simplistically we can fit the client requirement. In this case, we are doing hybrid approach. And we will stick to as much as possible to FHIR standards and then make it easier for the client so that they do not need to make changes on their side, as well as easier for the learning curve. What do you think, Sasha?
Yeah, I agree. And as usually, we need to make sure we consider multiple options. In FHIR spec is so deep, it's so wide, it's so rich. There are so many different ways you can implement your use case. And usually it's just mind-boggling. You never know. Every time you read a spec, you uncover a new thing for you. You discover a new feature, new cool aspect of the FHIR, which is great. And if you usually the customers, they just start the journey in FHIR, even though they say, oh, we want you to do this in FHIR, usually they have very limited exposure. And it's part of the organizations like ours to work with the customer and educate them on what FHIR, what can it do, what it cannot do. I like using visualization a lot, something like this one. Like it helps a lot to first represent what is your domain you're working with, what are the entities, what are the relationships between entities, and it helps a lot to, if you want to construct a bundle query, you know how you can do this, given that you have an encounter, how you can construct queries so that you can get relevant observations, diagnostic reports, document references, and accounts. Also, leverage any learning sources as possible. FHIR days is great. Implementation guides, keep, read, and spec. Read them, reread them, reuse them, search them, and consult them all the time. Even though you think you know something, just consult to make sure that it's right, whether it's an element, cardinality, or whatever. And finally, FHIR community. Actually, there was a session this time, one of the first sessions about FHIR community resources. That was great. And of course, you can use Zulip, Stack Overflow, email list. Great. So, and we mentioned here many sessions that have been covered this FHIR days and previous dev days that helped a lot with coming up with the different options for this solution.
Agreed. So if you see, the specification is so huge. Every time you go, you will learn always something new. So we need to keep learning with the specifications. And if specification is also evolving with this. So we just started with normative R4 and R5 is coming. So we need to keep learning.
Yep. Thank you very much, everyone. And that's the end of our presentation. And I believe we have 10 minutes for the Q&A.
Great presentation. So I think we've got one question in the Q&A, and that was by Camilla Altman, and she's asking whether for the converting the V2 to FHIR, did you use the spreadsheets from the V2 to FHIR work group? So what did you use as a reference? Did you use
right? Yeah. So we did, like, not in this is hypothetical project, but in general in our product, we did quite a bit of mapping, and we just went with the FHIR spec, US core, of course, and mapped all the elements that we have to our relational database, because we store data as discrete records. And actually, Maidul and Linda Michelson in our team, they're the best mappers in our organization. So, but we will we still have a lot of resources to map. So we plan to start using the mapping, but unfortunately, it's kind of behind what we already need. So I guess the best what we can do is to cross-verify that we did it correctly, post factum.
Yes, to add to the Sasha's questions, the same thing as we did initially mapping ourselves, and then IZ we saw in the IZ we just started, and we started mapping if we're missing something in our gaps, and we just go and add those elements again. It's evolving basically.
Yeah, I was sort of guessing whether this was a real use case or a constructed use case, and somehow I was wondering why you did not opt to use a CDR, because you would have had many. So I think the whole balance of choices would have been larger. So do you want to maybe elaborate on that?
Right. So, and our intent was to illustrate if you already have, let's say, 10-year-old system that is working great and will need to continue to work as this in terms of handling HL7 V2 and V3 messages and documents. And you want to enhance it with a FHIR capability, mostly on the retrieval side. So I think it's more like a natural progression where you start with a FHIR facade. So you don't really need like CDR or full FHIR server with a storage native in FHIR yet. However, when and FHIR retrieval is light, right? Compared to your full scope, it's light, like 5%, 10% more maybe. And it's but when you start going into more FHIR heavy implementations, when you start retrieving your data mostly in FHIR, right? Maybe it's best to start considering CDR, where you can do conversion of incoming V2 messages and CDAs, right? To FHIR store natively so that you can serve them to your customers quickly, efficiently. And on top of that, starting getting, receiving the incoming inbound data as a FHIR, in a FHIR format. But that's warrants when you already have some scale and some volume of the data coming percentage-wise as a FHIR. So we think that the best is to start with whatever you have. And then when you see like, okay, now it becomes really complex or slow or whatever to do all these conversions on the fly many times if needed, right? Then when it starts to be less efficient, then you need to think about more like FHIR native server.
And also, to add to it, and so also if we have old systems, it has been there for 10 years, and now if we wanted to support new interfaces, and the client wants, if you say client wants both the interfaces, old interfaces as well as the FHIR interfaces with this, unless we do migrate with the client to the new system, you will have a downtime, right? So we wanted to see, while building this, as well as to support the old interfaces. So we wanted to support both at the same time, so that rather than having a disruption in the system itself.
Right, and the natural progression hybrid can be, you still get it in a V2, you store it whatever it is so that you can serve it. And then you can replicate it, right? You can have a secondary storage where you convert to FHIR and store in FHIR right away. So you have kind of both, right? And then you can start serving more from FHIR. And if you see the utilization of the legacy goes down considerably, you can more invest on the FHIR side and then continue with the FHIR side.
Okay, let me check if there are any other questions. So no other questions. Maybe then we've got some time. I would sort of tend to slightly, I mean, I agree totally with you that the retrieval part is sort of, you get it up and running really quickly. You don't have to, so once you start storing data in FHIR, you have to deal with plenty of other issues. But that doesn't mean that you have to remove your legacy systems, because in any case, they're staying there. So what your goal is in the long run is to create a single source of truth in FHIR. And obviously that really raises the complexity enormously at some point where you get into patching and merging of messages, and will it be done by the server or done by the client? So I sort of get I like your simple approach, just getting it done, focusing on the retrieval part. Yeah, I still sort of was wondering whether in this case, the effort would have been maybe, okay, you'd have to install additional storage capacity in FHIR, you'd have to build that up, but it would have simplified some other things.
Yeah, it will, and it will make your system more flexible as well, because you can start support more complex use cases, right? Like GraphQL or graph definition. So which is very, I think might be very appealing to the clients.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's true. And that's the depending on the volume, whatever. It's again, like, I just want to repeat, this case is hypothetical.
Yeah.
Actually, we started working on something like that. We didn't do it, right? So it's completely hypothetical, but we learned a lot when we were doing things. So, but in our system, in our case, actually, in our product, we do have capability similar. Basically, we have a legacy, we have FHIR facade, we do have this. So we are still so like 98% non-FHIR. It's just, you need to make sure that you can justify to business, right? Money-wise, why you want to invest in something else that to some extent duplicates your capability, right? It might simplify the FHIR retrieval side and make it more flexible, more elaborate, but you still need to justify to your business.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I know those discussions, and I know that people sometimes consider a FHIR server as a duplication of data, but I think it's the replication and consolidation where you basically have one single source of truth. But I'm totally with you. Those discussions, I've got them every week with somebody. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't want to be here the one who's only asking questions. So I'm sort of wondering, because I was expecting there to be more questions. So I think we're just 2 minutes to the hour. I don't think we need to drag this on. We don't have any other questions. I found the presentation really great. Inside, I really liked it a lot. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for being a great audience.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So enjoy the remaining dev days.
Thank you.
Hope to see you around.
Bye.